Gary, thanks for joining us. As we've discussed, I'm honored to be the host of the series Your Honor, in which we're interviewing leaders who have a rich history with the bar to have a candid discussion with them about the profession, the judiciary, the bar and bench, and professionalism itself. So thank you for joining us, considering you are currently the president of the Florida Bar.
Well, thank you, Paul. I'm really happy to be here and have this opportunity to talk with you about the practice of law and professionalism and other important issues, and look forward to it today.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start this way, Gary. I hope you don't mind me calling you Gary.
Oh, absolutely. Please call me Gary.
Okay, thank you. Gary, can we start with where you went to high school, college, and law school?
Sure. I grew up here in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I went to a school called Forest Hill High School. And then I went to college at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And then I went to law school at the University of Miami.
And when did you graduate Miami Law?
Graduated Miami Law 30 years ago.
Okay.
Just a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. In high school, college, and law school, let's use those markers. Were there any particular people, family, friends, colleagues that became your mentors that helped shape the path you decided to take?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we're younger and even as we get older, having a mentor is invaluable. When I was very young, my grandfather lived about a mile away. And my grandfather, Joe Lesser, started our law firm actually 95 years ago. And he came down here from Rome, Georgia to speculate on real estate. That did not work out. And so he decided to be a lawyer down here in Florida, which he'd done in Georgia, and was a solo practitioner for many years until my dad joined him in 1960. And all I knew is my grandfather was the greatest guy I knew. He loved being a lawyer. He loved helping people as a lawyer, and he loved being involved in the community. Always like a big smile and a great attitude. And when I was little, I wanted to be that guy. And of course, when you're little, you don't compute Grandpa's mortality. And Grandpa was 68 when I was born. So I didn't have the opportunity to work with him. I missed him by 10 years, actually. But he was probably my first major role model in high school. In college, I think college is the time where you kind of find yourself. I still wanted to be a lawyer, but I thought about being a history teacher. I thought about being a journalist. I even thought about being a rabbi for a while, and still found my way to law school. And then in law school, I had the great fortune of connecting with someone who was a friend of the family named Todd Aronovitz. And I knew Todd, and I knew of Todd, but I didn't really know him well at all. And my grandmother said, Gary, you should call Todd Aronovitz because he's very nice. And I met him for lunch, and we had this really great lunch, and he ended up offering me a job. And I worked with him throughout law school. And then when I went to work with my dad, I continued to work with Todd on cases, and we've remained very close over the last 30 years. And my mentorship story with him is really pretty exceptional.
And how is that? What are the lessons that were most important to you that you learned from your years working with your dad and with Todd?
Well, my dad continued this philosophy of my grandfather's, which I really hold dear, which is that our job as lawyers is to help people, to help our clients. And the focus on the dollar, well, there's an old saying, people who try to chase the money never satisfactorily catch it. And so you can work hard and do a good job and be just fine. That was my grandfather, my father's choice. People walked into our office, and my dad helped them. Sometimes at a regular fee, sometimes at a very reduced fee. And to have had the honor of working with my dad for 28 years until he passed was really exceptional. He was a transactional lawyer, and I love my dad, but I wanted to litigate. I'd worked for Todd in law school, and he just threw me right into it. He would say, I want you to do a negligent security case complaint. Here's the file. And he was available, to answer questions, but, sink or swim. but you're not going to drown, and I'm going to check on your progress as you're swimming. And he was really an exceptional law boss in that way, and brought me to so many depositions. I think I did 13 or 14 trials with him in the time that I got to work with him in law school. And then, after law school, not staying with Todd was tough, but I wanted to go join my dad in the family firm, and things were slow at the family firm. He sent me coverage work. He introduced me to lawyers. He used me as his local counsel. As time went by, we started co-counseling cases, which we continue to do 30 years later. And so as a lawyer, boss, mentor, he was exceptional, but he also set me on my path with the Florida Bar. And I was involved with our Palm Beach County Bar. I chaired our professionalism committee for many years. We set up one of the first professionalism panels in the state of Florida, many years before the administrative order came from the Florida Supreme Court, making it mandatory. And Todd said, you seem to really like this. You should do Florida bar work. And I think it said something to the effect of, I'm sort of just a small town lawyer, and I don't know about any of that. He said, you should apply for a Florida Bar Committee. And that was 21 plus years ago, and I did, and I got appointed to the Professional Ethics Committee. And I really enjoyed it. And I ended up chairing that committee and then serving on another committee and chairing that committee. And it's policy. How do we help the legal profession? How do we help the court? How do we serve the public? And then over 12 years ago, Todd said, you should run for the Florida Bar Board of Governors. And I said to Todd, I don't really know what that is. Now, there's this Board of Governors that sometimes overrules us on the advertising committee. Is that what it is? And he said, yes, and this is where you can really be impactful. So I ran for the Board of Governors in a three-way race and ended up getting elected. The other two gentlemen who ran were really top-notch lawyers and leaders. And I thought I'd just serve on the Board of Governors for a few years and then move on. And Todd was one of the many people who years later encouraged me to run for president. He's become a dear, dear family friend. He's Uncle Todd to my children. And that is like the grand slam of mentorship.
Yeah, absolutely right. I've had the pleasure of working with Todd and knowing Todd, so I concur with everything you've said about him. Let's move on to the presidency of the Florida Bar, because we're in challenging times right now. Probably more challenging than we've seen, at least in my lifetime. Why did you want to be president of the Florida Bar?
Well, I saw that as bar president, if you want to, you can really have an impact and you can really make a difference. Or you can do the speaking tour and speak to lawyers all over Florida. And the day-to-day governance is also a lot of work. But I saw a few bar presidents that really set their mind to do something that would be of some significance and permanence. And I thought, well, that would be a good idea. And then a number of years ago, while newer on the Board of Governors, I went up to someone who was president at the time, and I said, I'm very worried about these newer lawyers that are graduating law school. Job market's tough. So they're going out on their own, they're putting up their own shingle or going to go work with a buddy, and they're not getting the mentorship experience that many of us have taken for granted, and we should have a mentorship program for newer lawyers. And the person who was president at the time, I won't mention his name, said, that's probably a great idea, Gary, but I'm not doing that. You want to do that, go be bar president one day. And I thought to myself, well, maybe I will. And over time, I saw presidents who were very impactful. And as you know, Paul, creating a mentorship program for newer lawyers, in fact, is one of my top priorities this year as president of the Florida Bar. And we have a special committee working on creating that program right now.
Yeah, and I know that, and that's very exciting because, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that we have, every president of the Florida Bar comes in with great goals and aspiration. And one of the things they always talk about is professionalism, civility, ethics, trying to find a way to deal with all that. And yet I must say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong because you probably know better than me on this, I see it as a constant problem. the professionalism, the civility issues, the ethical issues, the drug abuse or alcoholism issues. I don't think it's going away. So I'd like to get your thoughts, and please just tell us, the audience here, what you think. It's a constant problem. How do you see breaking through? Unless I'm wrong.
No, I think you're onto something, and data supports this even within the Florida bar. Every couple of years or so, we send out surveys to our members. We send out one survey about economic issues, and we send out another survey about what do you think is going on with the practice. And when Mike Tanner, my friend who was president before me, was going to become president, they did a survey. And what are the top challenges as the everyday practice of law? Professionalism has always been in the top three for a very long time. It's number one. And in fact, over 40% of those surveys said, we really need to do something about this now. We want more education. We want more explanation. You can have professionalism as this concept, right? We should all be more professional. And even with good intentions, in 2011, the court changed the oath of attorney to include language about civility. And I think that's been helpful. But the truth of the matter is that we live in increasingly uncivil times, and people don't have the patience. And, that's going to be reflected in every aspect of life, every job. But we as lawyers need to be better than that. So Mike, realizing that, or former President Michael Tanner, realizing that we need to really drill down on this, created a special committee on professionalism. There's a standing committee which does amazing work, but let's try to really focus on some solutions now and that we can implement going forward. And I had the great privilege of co-chairing that committee with Elizabeth Hunter, a great lawyer mediator from Stuart, Florida, who at the time was actually chair of the standing committee. And we focused on three buckets, really. How do we define it? How do we teach it? And how do we enforce it? And the truth is, we haven't really looked at it at 30,000 feet and in great detail in this way that I can ever remember. And certainly definitionally, when a lot of the resources on professionalism were created, we didn't have an internet. We didn't have social media. People weren't sending mean emails to each other. Like the bane of professionalism is some of these horrible written communications electronically that people would never say face-to-face ever. So we looked at how we defined it, and we made some recommendations on changing the oath and the creed. And that's been sent to the court just a few months ago, to the Supreme Court of Florida for their review. And we're going to see what they have to say and work on that more towards the fall. Additionally, we looked at how we teach it. And, intellectually, it's interesting to talk about professionalism. What are the societal benefits of being nice, right? But in nuts and bolts, maybe we haven't been teaching it practically enough in law school or frankly at any level. So the special committee on professionalism made a recommendation to a Florida bar produced videos that would go to Florida law schools. We contacted the deans of every single law school in Florida, and they were very receptive. There have been some Florida bar produced videos on different topics, but we really have the ability to put out a product that can talk about what you do when you get a mean email. What is the code of professionalism? How does the professionalism enforcement process work? So we're going to do that. Number two, for new lawyers, we have practicing with professionalism. Us older lawyers used to call it bridging the gap. And
I remember that.
Because of the pandemic and other reasons, including technological convenience, this has become all by Zoom. And there were some recommendations that were made about how we administer this course, practicing with professionalism. Number one, to include a more pragmatic and everyday professionalism lessons. Number two, to have live offerings or virtual live offerings. And then finally, to the extent that it may remain just virtual, more regular check-ins. We don't want people watching Bridge the Gap and every 30 minutes logging in to say, I'm still here. No, there'll be some Q&A, some participatory aspect that if they're not participating, they're out. Finally, in the reporting cycle right now, and people are always amazed when I tell them this, we have 33 CLE credits in our 3-year reporting cycle, which is actually slightly lower than the midpoint nationally, like pretty close. One professionalism CLE requirement. Some states have 2, 3, 5. So the recommendation was to increase to 3, and that's sitting at the court now with this report, and we'll see what the court has to say. Will they recommend increasing it to 3 or 2, maybe a hybrid ethics and professionalism? But the truth of the matter is right now, to get your professionalism CLE, it's 1 credit, and it's usually an add-on to some other CLE that you're taking. So us more experienced lawyers, because we don't want to say older lawyers, aren't getting the professionalism CLEs that we need. To say that it's young lawyers have a professionalism problem is unfair. I think it's a problem across the profession, and we need to drill down on our more experienced lawyers as well. And then the final piece, Paul, has to do with enforcement. I mentioned the administrative order from the court in 2013 and then 2015 to create a regimen of local professionalism panels. We learned many of them have fallen by the wayside, are largely inert, and are certainly not well known or understood by most of our lawyers, even in the circuits, the bigger circuits where they are active. So we made some recommendations to the court, since its current order from many years ago said every circuit is different, so follow whatever procedure you think is best. And that's what happened. We have judges, we have lawyers and judges. We made a recommendation for uniformity. 1 composition, 1 process. It's not a complaint, it's a referral. We made the recommendation for confidentiality because the local professionalism panel is designed to help a lawyer who maybe takes a wrong step off the path. And we want to help with mentoring amongst our own peers, getting that lawyer back on the good path. Now, if that lawyer took many steps off the path and is violating the rules regulating the Florida bar, it's a different story. And so we'll see where we go with that. So the bar spent the last year working on that, and we'll continue to push these forward because we do need to make a significant difference in how we define, teach, and enforce it.
Yeah, and I appreciate all that. Let me back up a second and ask you a question this way and see if it spurs additional conversation on this. I've always felt, and I think you and I may have discussed this earlier, that unprofessional conduct is not a standalone issue. It's not just people just, be nice, be polite. Many times there's a motive for it. And the motive is to either try to intimidate the other side, intimidate the client, run up expenses for someone who can't afford the litigation costs, intimidate the court, hide the ball, delay to not answer the interrogator questions, that there's a goal behind it. Am I wrong on that, or is that part of the issue also?
I think that's definitely part of the issue. There's 2 things that stand out. This, where it's a purpose of frustration, right? You poke. And the worst thing that happens, you get no response and you've successfully poked and not paid a consequence for it. And maybe you poke the person and then you get an overreaction. Aha, see, Your Honor, unprofessional. And that happens. That happens, more than it should. The Supreme Court of Florida has created this work group on civil litigation efficiency with a lot of big sweeping recommendations that are being vetted, a lot of comments that were filed. But one of the things that motivated the court to do that is exactly this sort of thing: delay, discovery abuse, and we'll see how these recommendations pan out. I think the final product will be modified for what's currently being recommended. But there has to be a level playing field where big firms and small firms can operate under the same general approach and rules with the same consequences. I would hope that's the purpose of one of the things that motivated the court. I always tell younger lawyers, when you're dealing with someone who's being unprofessional, or maybe a jerk. Is it an unprofessional to call someone a jerk? Maybe. But for purposes of this recording, when you're saying someone is not being as professional or nice as they could be, take that higher road. And take the higher road thinking that everything that is communicated will one day be before a judge. You didn't get interrogatory answers? Send an email. I've seen your interrogatory answers are late. Let me know when I can expect them so I don't have to file an unnecessary motion to compel. And you build a record. The problem is when you, the person who are being stymied, lose your patience. You get interrogatory answers that are insufficient. Send a little email saying, you really didn't answer 2, 4, 5, and 9, and I think we could do better on 11 and 12. I'd like to talk with you about it so I don't have to file an unnecessary motion. And you can control that narrative to some degree because that is very present, and I think you've nailed something correct that is out there, and the key is to not fall prey to that.
Yeah, and that's where we segue to where I wanted to segue, and that is the responsibility of the judiciary in the professionalism issues. So let me back up and take a run at it this way. I have discussed in the past the concept of passive injustice, and what I mean by that, and what has been written about that, is that if there's a person in a position of authority, like a judge, and the judge sees things are not going in a proper direction, that there is unprofessional conduct and discovery is not taking place, all those issues, and the judge doesn't do anything. For whatever reason, maybe the judge's calendar is too swamped, maybe their caseload is too much, maybe they're up for election. They just don't want to get involved. And we've heard some judges say that. By not getting involved, I have submitted that the judiciary then encourages the bad behavior and frustrates the good lawyer. I'll back up from that and ask you, do you agree or disagree with that scenario? And how do you suggest lawyers and judges address this issue of enforcement of bad, to get rid of bad behavior?
Yeah. No, I agree with the overall approach of what you're saying. And there's certainly some circuits where if you're a judge, you're going to have an opponent next election, regardless of what you say or do. And if you make the wrong person mad, you might have a well-financed opponent. I also think certain circuits have a culture of being more proactive on these things than others. I've heard stories of judges will say, you work it out. And if you can't work it out, come back. And if you're the good lawyer, you're like, Your Honor, that's my second motion to compel. I'm here right now. And it is discouraging to a lawyer who is trying to do the right thing, which is why I said before, build up an impeccable record. So you can say to that judge, Your Honor, actually, before we came here today, this is my second motion after my fourth email and my second phone call. And my request to Your Honor is don't make us come back here again because that's what's going to happen. And I have directly had the experience and heard of others having that exact experience where the judge says, okay. And then they focus and they drill down. I do know that the court work group on increased efficiency for civil litigation is also designed to tackle that, to basically require judges to follow certain schedules, almost like in federal court, and to require sanctions on lawyers who do not play by the rules. And so I know that was a big motivating factor with the Supreme Court of Florida to create this work group and the work product that's being recommended. It isn't fair if you are playing by the rules and you are actually losing because of it. That's very frustrating. I don't think it happens that often at all, but I think it would be very good if it happened less.
Yeah, and so let me then segue into this. Can you share with us your thoughts about the impact of elections, judicial elections, on the justice system?
So the idea of judicial elections has been in Florida for a long time, and conceptually it's a great idea. It's still nonpartisan. There's a recent change in the law that made our constitutional officers, like the sheriff and the supervisor of elections, partisan races, Republican versus Democrat. Now, that was a terrible idea, but they didn't ask me. They just did it anyways. So the idea of the judge having to face the people is conceptually very good. I think it's a great way for people to learn that we have judges and what their role is. It's amazing to me the lack of civics education that we often see. People think that a judge, I've had people ask me, is that judge a Democrat or Republican? I said, well, his political party is the Constitution of Florida and the Constitution of the United States. That is his role. And then I'll have a conversation and explain that. So there's certain benefits to having judicial elections, and it obviously require a massive change in the law to adopt a different formula. Obviously, a gubernatorial appointment in the case of a vacancy. The problem is some circuits that are more sensitive and more politically active, it makes it a lot harder to be a judge. I can tell you, Paul, and I think you probably know this, a little while ago, a couple of years ago, maybe a little less than that, we got an ask from the Supreme Court of Florida, we being the Florida Bar Board of Governors, and they wanted a change for how judicial referrals are handled for rules regulating for violation of rules regulating the Florida bar. And right now, if someone does a bar complaint, unless it's financial impropriety, stealing money, it'll go to a grievance committee, and then they'll make a recommendation, a finding of probable cause or not. And if probable cause, it then goes to a bar prosecutor. And if not, no probable cause, that's the end of it. And the Supreme Court of Florida asked for and received a change in our rules and process, where a judicial referral will always remain within the province of the court, which means it always remains in the province of the Florida Bar Board of Governors. So we've had situations now because of this where when it's a judicial referral and the grievance committee says no probable cause, it still goes to the Florida Bar Board of Governors Disciplinary Review Committee. And just a few months ago, we reversed the grievance committee and said probable cause. It was a professionalism violation, and one lawyer sending a lot of mean emails to a much younger lawyer. And I think that was a good change. And the goal was, A, for the court to retain jurisdiction of judicial referrals, and B, the judge knew that a bar complaint by that judge wasn't just going to go away. You'll get the appropriate hearings at the highest levels. So that was very helpful. Now, I don't foresee a change in our judicial election system. So given that's the case, I'd like to give judges as many tools as possible to make these reports, both for professionalism and disciplinary violations. There are going to be some judges who just aren't going to do it, but there will be judges who will. And when they see something really terrible, it'd be really helpful if they reported that more often.
Yeah, I agree with you. We talked about this briefly, but I'd like to drill down further on this. Can you share your thoughts on the impact of social media on the legal profession?
When we talk about professionalism and civility and social media, it's a reminder that lawyers are part of the society that we live in. And people aren't as nice or patient sometimes as they should be. And this is very regularly displayed in the world of social media. They call it, what do they call it? Keyboard bullies and all of that. People feel something and they type it on social media. I've been amazed at what I have seen, including from people who I thought would know better. Every now and then I'll get an email, just an email, and it makes me angry. And in my mind, or sometimes even in draft, I'll prepare a response and I'll sit on it for an hour or a day. But people don't think to do that. They're like, all right, I have to respond to this so I can move on to my next thing. In social media, which is more immediate than anything, people just knee-jerk say things that are just astonishing to me. And it's one of the reasons why the Special Committee on Professionalism made some recommended changes to include the internet and social media in some of our definitions, to make it very clear, to remove any doubt.
Right, exactly right. You mentioned this earlier. I want to discuss it further, and that is what I've labeled process over purpose, where the amount of cases a judge is handling is so substantial, and they're required to move the cases along and close a certain amount out each year, and that process. And I understand the importance of that. Do you fear that sometimes the process gets in the way of the purpose, where people are coming into court to be heard and for the judge to spend the time needed to give the just result?
So most of my cases are here in Palm Beach County. I've been to Dade, I've been to Tampa, to Tallahassee, a fair amount of cases in Tallahassee and Jacksonville. So I'd say primarily Palm Beach, Martin, Tampa, Jacksonville, and that hasn't been my experience in those circuits. Of course, every circuit is different. Some circuits have many, many more cases per judge. I think that the judges do the best that they can. I like judicial discretion. Judicial discretion is a great thing. And one of the issues that was raised with this work group on increased efficiency in civil litigation, it's a mouthful, isn't it? Is that some of the proposed changes may actually take away from the discretion of local judges. They have to follow these sanctions and other paths. And so it's a catch-22, right? We want to see predictability and fairness in outcomes, but suppose that outcome is taking away from the ability of the judge to exercise his or her discretion and see this one lawyer who this judge knows made a mistake. And isn't something that this judge has seen this lawyer do, and it can be worked out differently than dropping the hammer. And so it's a challenge. I'm by and large a fan of judicial discretion. This gives judges the opportunity to do things. So it hasn't been my experience of a volume of cases requiring judges to move things along in that way. But I've heard, and I know that this does happen in other circuits. You know, there's been a very significant need for more judges in Florida. We've been getting more judges appointed and funded from our friends in Tallahassee over the last couple of years, and that's been helpful.
Yeah, I spoke with a county court judge recently who commented that in Miami-Dade County, there are about maybe 150,000 or more cases in county court in Miami-Dade County, and there are 22 judges.
I can do the math on that.
Yes.
That's a lot of cases.
Yeah, and there's a requirement to, and that doesn't mean that's not a static number. That number is growing every day as you're trying to close cases out and hear cases, and these are just human beings trying to deal with it on the amount of hours you have.
Right.
What are your thoughts? And it's just a philosophical question, Gary. What are your thoughts about how the bench and bar just deal with the mass of cases coming in and demands upon the system itself?
The demands on the system are significant, and we're often being reactive, especially here in Florida, where we've had so much growth just over the last 10 years. And there's two areas that kind of give me a little bit of hope. One of the areas is just the other day, the court released its work group on sham and vexatious litigation. And this report just came out the other day, and it has some really good tools that are being recommended. Now, this has to go through the process and the rules committees and some rule changes. But I think this will help, number one, make much more streamlined pro se litigants. A lot of cases in county court are pro se litigants who file again and again and again after their case has been dismissed with prejudice again and again and again. And some recommendations for rule changes and technology changes to not let those clog up the system. We want everyone to have access to justice, lawyers and people who choose to be pro se. But when the day is done, the day is done. Another area that gives me a lot of hope in the world of county court is Michael Tanner, when he was president, made a recommendation. It was worked on all of last year, a platform, an online platform for resolution of lower value cases. This is something that happens in England, I think it's called like Her Majesty's Royal Bench or something. It sounds very British and proper. It won't be called that in Florida. And the level of money where someone can participate hasn't been determined yet. It's at the court's technology commission right now for their review. But I think that will help a great deal. And if you have a claim for $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000, you can go online and file your cause of action, get a response, and things can be resolved in that way, much greater efficiency. I think that would make life better for the county court judges, for sure. Now, the whole purpose of the work group for greater efficiency in civil litigation was to give the whole purpose was to give judges the tools to really move cases. That was the specific purpose behind the creation of that work group. Now, again, it would seem to require much bigger infrastructure and personnel than our state court system currently has. It almost imposes a system similar to the federal court system. And so we'll see. We'll see if we can get more staffing and more infrastructure, and we'll see what can be implemented with what we currently have. But to be able to move cases and to not let those who delay be rewarded was one of the major goals. What's interesting, Paul, and I'll kind of stop here, was during COVID, we saw a massive backlog of cases, right? You couldn't try cases at all. We learned to shift and all do hearings by Zoom, very different, but that's the new norm now. And what's amazing is in the last 6 months, that significant backlog of cases in Florida has been dramatically reduced. So that shows it can be done. And I think that we're moving in the right direction.
Great. Do you think that lawyers are sufficiently engaged with the Florida bar?
Short version, it could be better. It could be better. You want to get the answer to that question, try to run a contested election, become Florida bar president. And you will learn that most people think the Florida bar only exists because they need my dues. And if I have a problem like a bogus bar complaint, the bar doesn't help me. And I think there's some lawyers who feel that way. And of course, the frustrating thing is, the Florida bar is a mandatory bar. It's called a unified bar. So we're an arm of the court, and our job specifically is to work with and for the court in lawyer regulation, court rules, ethics, and professionalism. But on the other hand, we're a member organization. So we have a free technology helpline for small firms. We have a third-party mental health and wellness vendor, totally confidential. The Florida bar will never know, to try to address mental health issues, and all these other member benefits that many of our members don't know about. So when I was going to become bar president, I looked at our numbers. Our numbers, Paul, are largely in the 20%. About 20% vote in a contested bar election. About 20% is our email open rate, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. And my communications chair on the Board of Governors is a lawyer named Josh Chilson. And he's from the St. Petersburg, Clearwater area. And just a great guy and a great lawyer and a great servant leader. And I said, Josh, we have 1 year to get to the 30% mark. He said, what? But I believe it is doable. And it's doable by just a few communications tools. Asking Board of Governors members to support the Florida bar's communication efforts. That means going to the Florida bar's social media, commenting, liking, sharing. That means going to your voluntary bar organization and talking to your voluntary bars on a regular basis. There's this old school belief that only the president of the Florida bar can do that. Well, the president of the Florida bar generally goes to a local voluntary bar once a year. I know because I'm 2 months in and this is what I'll be doing for a while. Our local voluntary bars need to hear from our Board of Governors members. And then finally, our lawyer leaders, our section leaders, our Florida Bar committee chairs need to be doing exactly the same thing. And I think if we just actually drill down on that alone, we can get a significant percentage of more lawyers that are reached.
You said something just a bit ago, and I wanted to drill down on it. And I think the answer is yes, but I still like to ask, do you think lawyers truly appreciate the fact that under our system, the lawyers are officers of the court?
I think people learn it in law school, right? They have some inkling of that when they study for the bar and take their oath. And I think most lawyers do. I really fundamentally believe that.
Okay. What would you like your mentees? How would you like them to describe you? Because I know you're a mentor, and what are you trying to teach them?
So it's a great question, Paul, and I'm glad that you asked, because it relates directly with what I want to accomplish with the mentorship program that we're building. There's no shortage of voluntary, mentorship programs. Most of them fail. I mean, let's just be honest and say that, to some degree, in some instances, a larger degree. And they fail because the mentor who's talking to some newer lawyer who needs help is busy talking about themselves. In my day, I walked up 5 miles uphill to go to the courthouse. Then my horse fell over. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. And many of the newer lawyers, the mentees, many of them are there because participating in a mentorship program, they want a case. They want something tangible they can put their hands on. I'm glad I did this. I talked to Gary Lesser twice and I didn't get a case. I'm out. So when I have been mentoring lawyers and sometimes non-lawyers over the years, first of all, it has to be based on a two-way relationship, based on communication and respect. And you have to build that over time. My goal is that when people are done with this program, with their mentor for the year, this is someone they're going to stay in touch with for many years to come. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think the offerings of the course have to be very clear to the participants. What are they going to get out of it? We're going to have a small training. We've been looking at what other states are doing, Paul, and we want to adopt best practices and then do better than that, frankly. So we're going to have a small training for our mentors. We're going to have training for the mentees as to what to expect. So everyone starts on the same page. And perhaps even most importantly, because this is what will help build the relationship, there has to be structure. There has to be a curriculum. Not get on the phone once a month. Hey, how's it going? Great. That's great. All right, I'll talk to you in a month. So we're building out a curriculum of ethics and professionalism. We're building out courses on what does the path of your career look like? Talk to your mentor about where you're at right now. You're in year 2 and you're on your own, and it's going to talk about where to get involved in the Florida bar, in a local voluntary bar, in the community. These were the types of mentoring lessons that some of us got 30 years ago because it was just built into society at the time. And I think this will be very, very helpful. We have 2 co-chairs named Zach Zerust and Catherine Hurst Miller, both former presidents of the Young Lawyers Division of the Florida Bar and just great bar leaders. We've put together an amazing committee of lawyers who've been leaders on mentoring issues throughout Florida. And I think we're going to see a great, great program, because at the end of the day, the mentors who I've been trying to help over the years, I'd like them to think I'm nice. I'd like them to think I'm reasonably intelligent. I like them to think that I'm available, and that I like them to think that I have an open ear for what they have to say. And that, I think, will help make a mentoring program successful.
That's good to hear. Let me ask a 30,000-foot question here. We're living in times that some have described as becoming very tribal, where everyone's gone to their corner, and the talking is less and the shouting is more. You're the president of the bar. You're an important person in the legal profession. Do you have faith in the system that we're going to get through this?
So I have absolute faith in our independent legal profession. I have absolute faith in our independent judicial branch. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and I forget how they phrased it, so I'll paraphrase it and said, we are like an island. We're an island out at sea, and it's a stormy sea. As a society, it isn't even just the tribalism, my team versus your team. There's a significant loss of patience. My God, if you pull your car in front of someone on the road, you're going to get honked at, you're going to get the finger. This didn't used to happen. You see the finger a lot more now. You read articles about road rage where people are just so angry, and they go from 0 to 60 to 80 in a heartbeat. So I think we have a significant problem in society. And I'm hopeful, between all the technology changes, I think COVID certainly amplified the lack of patience and increase in anger. So I'm hopeful that as a society, we can come out on the other side at some point, because how we are treating each other, how we are sometimes speaking to each other is poor. The legal profession is designed to be better than that. And when I talk to newer lawyers and talk about our system, professionalism, ethics, it's designed so we can be our best lawyers and our best selves. That's why we have these ethics rules. That's why we have professionalism, not just as an intellectual concept. When we can talk intellectually, do people give to charity so they can help or so they can feel good? That's not the issue. The issue is that the donation was made and someone is being helped. In our world, ethics and professionalism help lawyers be their best selves and be their best lawyers. And so I think that we are doing pretty well, especially considering how it looks sometimes out in the stormy seas.
Yeah, and by phrasing it that way, I had sent an email to you and Rebecca Bandy earlier today. Hopefully during one of your moments, you'll be able to take a look at it. I know you're crazy busy. That there's a discussion about we have to be islands of sanity. That especially the judiciary, the legal branch, the bench and bar, with all the issues taking place in society, when they come to the lawyer, when they come to the court, when they walk into that courtroom, there has to be faith that they've left the insanity and they've gone to the island of sanity. Does that make sense?
No, I agree 110%. I mean, part of the lawyer's job, right? If we have a client who's angry or upset, we have to walk them through that. What's your goal? What do you want to accomplish? You have to sometimes make a decision. Business decision speech is well received by clients. And sometimes we just have to listen a little bit to get them to where they need to be. And so I really believe in the role of the lawyer in that regard. The judge has the challenge, of course, where litigants are going at it with each other, and maybe sometimes lawyers aren't doing as an effective job of tempering their clients' anger instead of letting the dispute be about what the dispute is about. And judges play such an essential role. And I think that they do a really, really good job. I remember right before COVID being in the Palm Beach County Courthouse. And this is when you would sit in the courtroom and watch other lawyers argue until it's your turn. And unfortunately, newer lawyers aren't going to have that experience for the most part. And that's a tremendous loss. And there's nothing that we can do about it. But in terms of role modeling and learning, that was an exceptional experience. I know as a younger lawyer, I would sit in the back of the courtroom and just watch, what are the good lawyers doing? That bad lawyer, he's yelling and screaming, his face is all red. And the better lawyers are waiting, they're listening, they're speaking in a professional and clear manner. And I thought, I'm going to be more like that guy. So the lack of that opportunity is a problem. But right before COVID, I'm sitting in the courtroom, and I see this one guy yelling, and this other guy not talking much at all. And it struck me as odd. And I sat back and I thought, he's watching this guy, his opposing counsel, give himself enough rope. He's not even talking about what the issue is. I saw the judge go like that, and he went, excuse me, hold on a second. What's this hearing about? And he tempered down the angry lawyer, who was able to regain his composure and focus on the issue. And guess what, Paul? He was right. He was right on the issue. And he did win that hearing on that day, because the judge made sure we focused on the issues.
I think you and I would agree that after all is said and done, we are the sum of our choices.
Yeah.
And I've often said that how we live our life each day is the definition of our life. It's how we treat each other each day, how we present ourselves, and how we go to court, how we present the case, how we treat people. That's how you define yourself. With that as a segue, we've gone about an hour, believe it or not, Gary, and I have one last question for you, and that is, what would you like your legacy to be?
Well, my legacy with the legal profession, or my legacy with my kids when I'm gone?
I've been writing about, what we often talk about, a moral or an ethical will, so to speak. What do you want your family, your friends, your colleagues to say? Now that's Gary.
I guess that I tried to make a difference. I tried to make an impact. I've always been this way. My grandfather was a tremendous giver and doer for others, and as were my parents. I think if you got any of my daughters on this show, on this podcast, you get an answer that would say, my dad always tells us to give to tzedakah, to give to charity. My dad always says to treat everybody the same way. There's an old saying, I'm sure you've heard it before, that there's the golden rule, do unto others how you would have others treat you. And every other rule is essentially an offshoot of that rule. And I've always believed that to be true. We see versions of that, right? Talk to the CEO and the janitor in the same way. Of course, treat every human being with kindness. And I think that more people, if they just blocked out the noise and focused on that and had a little bit more clarity, I think a lot more people would behave more like their best selves.
Mr. President, thank you very much for your time. This has been a delight for me. Gary, the Florida Bar is in good hands with you this year, so I thank you for being here.
Well, listen, Paul, I've enjoyed the time together, and I'm glad we could have this discussion. And I look forward to speaking with you soon, and I'll keep working hard as president of the Florida Bar.
Thank you.
Thank you.